Yeah, this is the, I was looking at a lot of people who had their lives turned around pretty radically by, um, I suppose, really giving their lives to Jesus, putting Jesus first. So I started to notice there's a bit of a pattern here with these people who give their life to Jesus, and when you put Jesus first, that stuff starts to work out. I found it particularly worked in my relationship with my son's mum. Um, I would have been a particularly dependent type of person, very reliant on partners in relationship in the past, and suddenly when I shifted my dependency onto God, and called on God and went out for walks at night, under the stars, and called on God to solve my problems, I found that I got answered. I got answers. Most of the time, he was saying to me, "Well, which of us is God? Which of us is God?" In which case, I had to go, "Oh, well, actually, you're God." And he'd go, "Yeah, well, then do you want to stop trying to be God?" Because I think I was trying to solve all my problems, and what I've realized, and one of the great things about being a Christian, is that you can actually surrender all your problems to Him, and that He'll actually solve them. He'll actually solve your problems for you, or at least you'll find a solution for your problem when you're not stressed. Yeah. So I think at the same time in the last 7 years, as well as attending church 3 times on a Sunday and on a Wednesday night, I also was doing anger management classes as well, which meant that I was getting to talk about myself, my situation, my life, my problems, and maybe realizing that there was an awful lot of trauma in my childhood. Not so much necessarily to do with the death of my father, but also to do with my, difficulties in my relationship with my mom. My mom was quite unpredictable, and there was a lot of shouting and use of the wooden spoon and that when I was a child, and so there was a lot of trauma there. So I grew up with quite a fear of people, and certainly not a very healthy opinion of myself. And a lot of that got corrected from listening to the Bible. A lot of that got corrected from listening to words like, where the Bible scriptures say that we're made in the image of God, and learning to realize that I was actually loved by God. That, I think that film, The Shack, and a lot of the teachings that Paul Young has on YouTube in relation to that as well, is it really makes it really clear that God's a loving father. He's not just, this idea of God has been a really punishing, faraway God. It's that really the prodigal son parable, where the father comes running to the son who's been overseas and has spent all his money on that, and decides to come home. That the father comes running down the field and greets his son, and puts his ring on his finger and kills the fatted calf. That's probably a better image of the father heart of God than this scary, kind of dark, permanently pissed off kind of guy that we often get portrayed, I think, as God the Father. This scary, cantankerous, kind of busy God that, like, if that you feel like as if you can't really approach him. Yeah. So anyway, 7 years into my walk of faith, I sort of feel like as if I've reprogrammed a lot of my thinking, and what I've started to really realize from interacting with other people, in the world generally, is that there's a lot of people still stuck in the follow the leader way of thinking that I had before I found Jesus. There's a lot of people, there seems to be a lot of depression out there. There's a lot of suicide. There's a lot of alcoholism. There's a lot of divorce. There's a lot of family violence in New Zealand anyway. There's a lot of poverty. There's a lot of hopelessness. There's a lot of sickness. There's a lot of stress, work stress, and dissatisfaction and unhappiness. And there's a lot of perversion out there with the porn industry. There's a lot of alcoholism and drug abuse out, so, and there's a lot of criminality, so we've got a major P problem in this country. We've also got a major, as I mentioned, family violence. We've got teen suicides. We've got suicides of every age, and we've got a massive poverty problem. So, I'm probably missing a lot, but what I've noticed from my interaction with different Christians, one of the most significant would be getting involved in Man Up, which is part of Destiny Church, and to see some of the guys who've previously been involved in gangs, criminal gangs, coming to Jesus and turning their lives around, and just kind of turning into soft teddy bears from kind of really dangerous, aggressive, violent people. Families getting reunited together. Marriages getting reunited and families coming back together again. Children being able to spend time with their families. Hope is probably the biggest word being generated. People. So we've had, between Man Up and Destiny, Man Up and Legacy for ladies, and then Legacy Diamonds for girls, and Boys to Men for the younger guys. To me, it's just very transformational. And so, what I found significantly when I went back to Ireland as well was that people didn't have that. The missing part in there was a relationship with God. People didn't have a relationship with God. People were nominally Catholic, but nobody had, like myself, nobody had ever suggested that they put Jesus first. And indeed, not very few Christian Catholics actually read the Bible. I was actually discouraged by the local parish priest, or one of the priests in the church, when I went back to Ireland. He said he didn't think that I should be reading the Bible because I wouldn't be able to interpret it properly. And I don't agree. I think it's a big mistake. I think the word, what I've certainly felt in the last 7 years is that reading the word every day has been a big part of my personal growth and a huge comfort to me. So just getting back to the kind of 20 points that I put down for, in terms of this political party, Jesus First. So the number one was abolish prostitution. So I just don't see any winning in prostitution. Basically, I think it's a career of last choice probably for most women. And I think having it legalized makes it easier for girls to fall into this profession. I think there's a huge potential for underage abuse, and I also think that it's also extremely bad for clients. Because in biblical terms, really what you're promoting here is fornication, which is a sin in the Bible, which is sex outside marriage. But also, you've also got the possibilities of people committing adultery, which is married people who are getting involved with prostitutes. So yeah, just a pretty strong no from me. Number two, abolish abortion except in medical emergencies. I think, before I was a Christian, I didn't really see much value in myself. I didn't realize that I was made in the image of God. I didn't realize that I was made by God. I thought I came from the monkeys. I didn't realize that I was, made on purpose for a purpose, and that each human being is special. And so, it started to realize that the baby in the womb, really from conception, is actually a divinely created being And so my eyes got opened, probably particularly by the video Unplanned, which is a great video. It's worth a look if anyone feels like having a look at that. It's really great how a girl who was running an abortion clinic then turned around and became an activist against abortion. So yeah, there's also quite a nice thing online about a doctor who was an obs and gynae consultant, and he was doing so many abortions a day until he lost his own child in a car accident. And then I think he went back to trying to do abortions again, and he just couldn't do it. Because I think his eyes were opened and he realized what he was actually doing. So in New Zealand, we have about 250 abortions a week. I think it's about 12,000 a year. And that's 250 deaths as a result of abortion, if you like to put it that way, which would be the equivalent of 5 Christchurch killings every week as a result of abortion. Yeah, so just figures that are, if you think of it in terms of people in your family, who in your family would you not like to be here? I think as we make abortion more available, it becomes a sort of cosmetic option rather than, it becomes a very easy option, becomes an issue of convenience rather than what it was supposed to originally be, which is like a medical emergency thing if the health of the mother is compromised. Okay, 3. So this is one that I think is getting a lot of heat from people. The idea of making divorce illegal unless infidelity can be proven. So I think what I really want to say here is that I'm against divorce. I know in certain circumstances, I don't know what those circumstances are. I mean, I have found in my own relationship that it's been a bit of a struggle to keep our relationship together. But I'm glad we didn't get, myself and my son's mum, we're not married, but I'm working on it. I think the problem with readily accessible and easily accessible divorce is that it becomes an easy option. It becomes a kind of an option perhaps a lot sooner than it should. Maybe there's some wriggle room there for, to kind of have a regulation that people have to be separated for 2 years before they can get a divorce. I just don't know. But I mean, the bottom line is I'm coming from, Jesus said in the Bible that what man put together, what God put together, no man should divide. And he says it I think it's in Matthew 19, and there's a whole verse on divorce there where Jesus is talking about, that we shouldn't have divorce unless there's been adultery in the relationship. So, I don't know. I think people are screaming down, there's an absolute screaming hissy fit about this because, there's people who've got divorced and maybe they don't feel so good about it. And then maybe there's people who got divorced and then feel really good about it. And so I don't know why there's so much reaction on that, but there is. But it's a contentious issue, that's for certain. Number 4, abolish alcohol. Well, it's probably the only thing that I can say is I was a binge drinker for 30 years. At some point, about 9 years ago, I realized that alcohol was doing absolutely nothing for me. That it was, that I wouldn't pour it into a dog's bowl. And so pretty much there and then I stopped drinking it myself. It's been probably one of the best things possible for me to stop drinking. And I cannot think of anything good that comes out of alcohol. It's responsible for huge amounts of family violence. It's involved in 50% of fatalities on the road. It's involved in any amount of people not showing up for work. So yeah, I think it's a total non-win. It's a total, and plus it's a huge suppressor of emotion. So you have people going out and getting pissed rather than actually it's a disinhibitor, which means that you've got people getting into all sorts of relationship situations that they otherwise wouldn't normally get into. You know, I mean, certainly when I was out, you get drunk and you just basically, well, yeah, you know, it's hard to even go into it now at this stage, but I certainly wasn't spending a lot of time getting to know people before I was trying to get back to their house or whatever. You know, it's just like, yeah, disinhibitory is an understatement. So number 5, another biggie. So this idea of making same-sex marriage illegal. Okay, so this is, I'm getting an awful lot of heat on this, and I think the reason is because people think that I'm anti gay people. Not true. I'm not. I'm anti-gay marriage, and there's a difference. I don't believe that people are terminally homosexual. I don't believe that there's any big difference between homosexuality and pedophilia, or even bestiality. I actually don't believe there's a big difference. 29, I went through a very strong suicidal point in my life, and at one point actually tried to commit suicide. Well, there was 3 times when I intended to commit suicide, so had a plan. Once I tried to gas myself. Well, once I tried to, you know, connect a petrol. Once I tried to connect a hose onto the exhaust pipe of a car, but that fell out. Second time I was off to buy a rope, you know, to jump off a bridge and hang myself. And the third time, I was heading out into a field with a bit of glass, and so all of this was because I was afraid. I thought I was gay, and I thought that I was. I didn't want to be gay, but I thought I was. Now, thank God I saw through that. Thank God I managed to actually see. I saw a movie with twins on it, identical twins, several sets of identical twins, and one set there was one guy was very kind of deep voice and talking about his brother, and the other brother was very high voice and kind of very effeminate sounding, and I just went, wow, these are identical twins. So if they're identical twins, then they've got identical genes, which means that all this kind of bullshit that people go on about, saying that you're either gay or you're not gay and it's genetic and all the rest is complete horse. It's just bullshit. And I realized that it was similar to the hermaphrodite frog scenario, where you get if you put 2 male frogs into a container or whatever, apparently one will turn into a female. And so I felt that what I saw in the twin behavior was that where there was 2 male twins, that one tended to dominate the other, and so the other was exhibiting more effeminate behavior or less male dominating behavior, probably in order to stay safe in close proximity to the other. And so I firmly believe that this is what you're seeing in people who are exhibiting homosexual behavior, is that they're just there's a developmental issue here. There's an intimidation issue, where they haven't actually fully, they're not confident males, and so they've got so they're just very underconfident males. And I think when you really get down to it and start talking to a lot of these people who've got sexual disorientation issues going on, you usually come up with an enormous amount of insecurities around their actual sexuality and their sexual identity, and there's often a lot of parenting issues, role model problems, and often even histories of abuse, violence. It's never as straightforward, like, I went to school and that was it, like I was just different to everybody else. It's never like that. There's always something in the background, and a lot of stuff in the background, often missing dads, in my case, Um, it's just, it's a psychotherapeutic minefield. It's not a minefield. In my view, people who've got homosexual tendencies or issues with their sexuality is what I'd like to consider more. I think that they need to get some serious help, and I don't think that giving people a marriage certificate is in any way helping. And so that's my view, and I think it's a view that I've developed, you might say, the hard way. Okay, next, number 6, abolish tax for voluntary tithe. So this is quite a new idea that just came to me, and I just feel that everybody seems to resent tax. Nobody likes paying it, and a lot of people don't pay it, and a lot of people avoid tax, particularly some of the higher earners. And I certainly find that in the church that I have been going to, I'm not going to now, but I was going to for the last 6 or 7 years, there seems to be a very, very enthusiastic, what would you call it, habit of tithing. And people seem to go along with the concept of the biblical tithe. It's voluntary in church, and I think it should be voluntary as well. So people voluntarily normally give 10% of their income. And the idea in the Bible was that if you give 10% to God, that the other 90% is blessed, which is probably why people are so enthusiastic to give that 10%. But I actually think if everybody in the community was giving 10% in form of a tithe to government, I don't know how that's going to work out between tithing to government or tithing to church. I haven't really thought that far ahead. Or let's just, I haven't had a revelation of how that could work. But I just think it's exciting, really, the concept of people giving willingly and enthusiastically, rather than kind of under duress and voluntarily. So, yep. So unstable. Please wait while we try to connect you. Yeah. So, pornography. A lot of people have said that pornography is something that's become available at a very early age in their lives, and that there's far too much pornography on the internet at the moment. I certainly feel that probably the best thing to do is to just make it less available. And I think if it's less available and we have tighter controls on it, obviously there's blurry lines in terms of what's pornographic, and I think, I'm not a crazy expert on this, but I think there are some it's going to be some feelings about people as to what's what's a bikini and what's a thong, what's pornographic and what's just elegant clothing. But I think certainly a lot more. I think we could tighten up a lot on the legislation around pornography. That's just my point. Number 8, violent movies. I also think that we could put a lot more restrictions on what's allowed in the country. It was very easy, I feel, to get a universal clampdown on the videos that were surrounding the Christchurch massacre, with simple legislation. And I think there's a lot of violent movies out there, and I have heard some kind of reports that copycat crimes and a lot of and also that people can get addicted to violent material. And I think I don't as I say, I don't know an awful lot about it, but it doesn't come across to me as a healthy way of spending your day. Gambling, again, there seems to be a lot of, number 9, there seems to be a lot of addiction related to gambling. So I think where there's addiction, I think we need to have controls. Yeah, the idea of people sitting in a casino basically weeing on the chair rather than leaving the casino is just like, it's just got to be bad. Um, and I think a lot of the time as well, yeah, I mean, it's an addiction. So I think it's well, in those cases, it's got to be an addiction, doesn't it? So I think, again, I think it's something that what we could do without. Number 10, um, reducing suicide to zero. Um, so, you know, I've got quite a bit of criticism on Facebook about my idea of reducing suicides to zero. Um, the I think we need to seriously look at suicide. I think we need to look at, I think it's a multi thing. I think if we're dealing with family violence, you're also going to, and sexual abuse, which is my next point. If you can reduce family violence and reduce sexual abuse, you're going to reduce hopelessness. If you can reduce hopelessness, then you're going to reduce your suicide. I think also, the sickness one that I have here, number 12, end sickness. I mean, I have having been a medical doctor and having got a huge interest in emotional therapy and that, I have found, and having done 100 anger management classes, I've also noticed that when people are hopeless and stressed out, they tend to get sick. When people have got stuff that they haven't been able to talk about, they tend to get sick, depressed, anxious. A lot of the mental health problems that people have, their social phobias, their incompetences. Certainly, this is my case. Stem from trauma, and so I think, one of the things that I found from the anger management classes is that if you can actually get people talking about their traumas, and talking about their lives, like, I've been amazed to have 10 guys sitting in a class and we're all sitting there like little 2-year-olds, basically just really scared of the world. I mean, it shows up in our inability to manage our finances, inability to maintain relationships, inability to hold down a job. But actually, it's pretty obvious pretty quickly, well, it certainly is to me, that everybody just seriously lacks confidence in that group. And so I found that I feel that zero is a very good target. I looked at a TED talk on on YouTube that talked about a doctor who was involved in trying to reduce the number of what was it? In hospital infections or whatever in some place in America. And he said that they, traditionally they always aimed for like 10% reduction, 20% reductions and stuff like that. But he said nobody had ever thought of zero as a target, to have zero in hospital infections. And so basically they sort of set this new target of zero, and he said it was astounding, the results that they got just by simply setting a target that was kind of worth aiming for, rather than a kind of a token, kind of like 10% reduction, 20% reduction. And like, I think every life is really important. And so I think that with a lot, possibly there's going to have to be a lot of creative thinking. I do think that we should at least be aiming to get suicides to zero. I think somebody said that there was like something like 600 suicides per year in New Zealand, and some down in Devonport, somebody put down on the pier 600 pairs of shoes in a line to show all the people that had committed suicide in New Zealand in 1 year alone. And apparently it was shocking to look at those shoes, and really sad, so I think, again, people have laughed at me and that and said, oh, you must be crazy and you must be stupid, but I don't think so. I don't think I am being stupid. So family violence, sexual abuse to zero, same as I said, I think with more hope, more awareness, more understanding, there's another thing that's on my heart as well, is to set up 1,000 anger management clinics, similar to what is available in North Harbour, Living Without Violence, in Takapuna. Michael Cooney there has got an amazing, and his wife Genevieve, they've got Gwendolyn. They have an amazing operation there with classes for men and women. And if I could be involved in getting 1,000 of them strung out across the country, I think you're going to see a huge change in the amount of family violence, and in the amount of violence generally. The intimidation, this kind of warrior image that people feel that they have to portray in order to be safe. I just think it's an absolute lie from the enemy, and I don't think that that was the way it was with Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. I don't think that's the way that God intended us to be, and I don't think we all have to play for the All Blacks before we're marriage material. Certainly hope not. Anyway, well, I know not actually. It's just crap. It's bullshit. We're all different. We're made in God's image, and we're different. The Bible says that some of us are the ears, some are the nose, we're all different parts of the body. So we've got some intelligent people, you've got some creative arts people, you've got some strong people, you've got some people that like to sing, some people that like to dance, some people that are good at golf. It's just everybody's different. And I think narrowing it down to kind of like that we all have to be not only on the All Blacks team, but we all have to actually be the number 4, number 5 on the All Blacks team. We all have to be the second row in the All Blacks team. It's just all to be the same size. He would have made us all the same size. Shit. I think if God had wanted us all to be the same size, he would have made us all the same size, and he didn't. Okay. So rehabilitation for prisoners. Carteen. Yep. So I've spoken to a couple of people who have been in jail, and they were, certainly when I talked to them, they were quite cynical about the amount of attempts at rehabilitation in prison. To me, it's a wonderful opportunity for rehabilitation. I know obviously you're going to have to deal with an awful lot of hurt people and very negative people, and probably some pretty negative attitudes. But I think, again, we should be aiming at 100% rehab. And I think a lot of the thing as well is that, I think some of these people need some love. However, that's going to be put on the plate, I'm not sure. But I don't think that a lot of these people need punishment as much as encouragement. Okay. So the 14 is kind of similar to 12, which is basically change the healthcare to a holistic model. I'm not so much talking about lotions and potions as, basically bringing in emotional therapy and counseling into the hospital and into the healthcare setting more obviously. I think a lot of people with chronic medical problems are only getting offered tablets. They're getting a limited prognosis in terms of their ability to get better. And I think it'd be much better to offer them something, it's just a link that a lot of consultants haven't made. There's a lot of movies out there on, The Connection is one, Brandon Bays and Kevin Billett, the journey.com operation, that they have, they talk consistently about how emotional traumas can actually sit in the body and cause physical disease. Brandon had a massive tumor. Kevin suffered from depression. I had the death of my dad sitting there undealt with for years, eating away at me and causing all sorts of problems. And I think, any doctor nowadays who hasn't really kind of got a concept of the link between emotional health and physical health isn't really fully educated. It's probably the nicest way that I could say it. And I'm not sure if they're capable of offering a complete service to their patients. And I think you're going to see this changing. You know, if it isn't as a result of my input, it'll be somebody else's pretty soon, I think. Yeah, I was pretty appalled with the responses that I got, you know, when I was trying to help people who had chronic medical problems, and, you know, get kind of into their background a little bit and find out why were they so stressed out, what was going on in their lives. And I found a lot of stuff that people hadn't dealt with. So warrant of fitness for housing, I think it was National Party put that out as an idea. In terms of bringing rental properties up to standard, I think a warrant of fitness is a really good idea for all housing. Warrant of fitness for all companies, I just stuck it in afterwards. I was thinking more in terms of their certain things like health and safety, but I think there is already something like that, something in that line in place. Zero workplace accidents. So again, it's just I'm thinking in terms of a zero target for workplace accidents. When I did a site safe course, you know, a couple of years ago, I was quite surprised at the amount of risky behaviors and near misses that it actually, the amount of risky behaviors that preceded a near miss, and then the amount of near misses that preceded an actual accident, and the amount of accidents that preceded a serious accident, and the amount of serious accidents that preceded a death. So I think in the end, it was like for every one death in the workplace, there was something like 20,000 risky behaviors. So I think, again, there's a culture of underreporting because people are afraid of not rocking the boat and losing their job. And I think that there's a huge amount of room for improvement there, with some creative ideas on how to encourage reporting and prioritize workplace safety. Probably maybe mostly with the idea that kind of like the most valuable commodity that a company has are its employees, certainly as much as its clients. And I think, you know, sometimes I think employees are often treated as, you know, being less important than profit. And I think I read some report that said that the top 500 companies in the world, that, you know, I think a huge proportion of them are very much employee friendly, rather employee orientated rather than profit orientated. And that was the kind of the generator for their success, was their, oh shit, I'm not losing my points. Okay, let's just see if I can get this back. Okay. Like voluntary, right? So number 18. Yep, I'm a Christian. I found going to church being a really positive influence for me. So yeah, I think, you know, the gospel says, Jesus says, go and make disciples of all nations. You know, preach the word far and wide. I want to at least tell people about Jesus. I think there's an awful lot of people who don't know anything about the gospel. They don't know. They still think that they came from the monkeys. They don't realize that it's 170 generations to Adam and Eve. They don't realize that the flood was a reality. They don't know anything about the Tower of Babel. They don't know anything about the great dispersion from the Tower of Babel. So there's a lot of ignorance out there. A lot of people don't think that Jesus was real. You know, so yeah, they still believe that they came from the monkeys. So I'm putting it up there as a target for seriously good evangelism. And the other thing about it is that, you know, the Bible is pretty clear that we're not spiritual beings. We're not just humans. We're spiritual beings, and that after we die, we're either going to go to heaven or hell. So, we're talking about people's eternity here. So if people don't know the gospel and don't know who made them, and they don't realize that there is a God, then they don't realize that there's a heaven or a hell, then they're basically just groping around in the dark here, but also on their way. They're not going to go to heaven if they haven't accepted Jesus. You know, I mean, that's the simple sort of version of it, but there's kind of long-term consequences here for not telling people the truth of who they are. There's a lot of identity confusion out there, certainly by judging on the responses that I got. Well, on Facebook, there's an awful lot of people out there that actually have no idea where they came from, who made them, and where they're going. So probably hence a lot of unhappiness. Anyway, that's a long story. You could go into that one for a long time. Free food for the poor. Yeah, I think, you know, people shouldn't be hungry, bottom line. I think there's obviously no shortage of food out in available. I think there's a, you know, if people have got big houses and big bank accounts and yachts and stuff like that, I think it's not inconceivable that we could have something like a food card so that people can buy enough food. Teach creation science in schools, not evolution. Yeah, that's going to be hard to turn that one around, because there seems to be a very popular concept out there called Darwin's theory of evolution, which is by its definition a theory, but certainly it was what I grew up with, this idea of the man coming from the monkeys and the millions of year old earth. And I think that you know, somehow we've got to try and get creation science back into the schools. You know, I think the biggest stumbling block over a lot of that people will come up with is carbon dating. And people talk about the carbon dating has dated such and such as millions of years old and that, and I certainly had my questions about it. But I'm lucky enough to be living with somebody who's done quite a lot of research in this area and in every area related to apologetics in the Bible. There's a really great website called Answers in Genesis, which I found really good, and that talks about a lot of this stuff. But my very quick sort of understanding of carbon dating is that apparently there was a volcano called Mount Etna that erupted, I think, about 3 or 4 years ago, and some of the lava depositions were carbon dated, and shown the results came back that the rock formed by that eruption was something sort of, am I thinking something in the region of around 50 million years old or 30 million years old, where it's like it actually only formed 3 or 4 years ago. So that's just one example of where I found that evidence that the carbon dating isn't reliable. So that's the same argument I gather that the creation science experts put forward to argue against carbon dating, you know, showing that stuff is millions of years old, is that the carbon dating is incapable of accurately telling the decay rate of the carbon-12 isotope or whatever it is. I just don't know enough about it, but I just know that it's not, pardon the pun, as rock solid as what a pun, but it's not as rock solid as people would, perhaps some people would like us to think. I gather that scientific people have been kind of divided into 2 scientific camps. There's not so much creation scientists and non-creation scientists and evolutionary scientists as creation scientists and atheistic scientists. Okay, so the atheists are very pro-evolution, and the theists are more in favor of creation science. But there has been an awful lot of if you ever have to look on Google, you'll find hundreds and thousands, if not thousands, of scientists, really well-known scientists who are very strong Christians. And you would have to ask yourself, why would a scientist be a very strong Christian if the science of creation, which is basically the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve, Noah and the flood, the Tower of Babel, the Great Dispersion, and 170 generations from Adam and Eve to us, and the reality of Jesus didn't add up. Okay, hope that's not too long a sentence. Just in case anybody's interested, the ark, believed to be the Ark of Noah, was discovered on the mountains of Arafat in 1977 and excavated to some extent in 1989. And there's a YouTube video on that. If you look for it, it's Ron Wyatt, W-Y-A-T, was the archaeologist who was involved in that discovery. Okay, so finally, the last one, number 22. So possibly abolish the national passport for an international passport to provide free geographical movement. Okay, so this is another biggie that just sort of came to me, you might say in the middle of the night. I hate all this restrictions that people have when it comes to visas. You know, the circumstances that some people have to live in because they can't cross borders. I mean, maybe Syria would be an example of that. I don't know. Maybe Mexico would be an example of that. I'm just not in favor of, and there's an awful lot of people in this country that are living on poor wages simply because they've got all sorts of visa restrictions and they can't change job so easily. I know, actually, I said it to a friend of mine, look, why don't we have a one world passport? I think he thought it was a great idea. I thought it's a possible idea. Somebody was arguing about it and saying it's ridiculous, but I then said, well, Europe has a single European passport. And what I didn't realize at the time, I thought there was 12 or 15 countries in Europe. I didn't realize that there was actually 44 countries in Europe use one passport. Now, if it can work to some extent in Europe, well, then why can't it work in the whole world? I think perhaps, you know, we might think that, oh, well, the amount of criminality that could move undetected, you know, well, can we contrast that against the amount of freedom that it might provide, and maybe even the amount of industry that it might generate? You know, I think it's worth considering. You know, and just put it down as an idea. I did say possibly. Okay, so anyway, that's my video. I just wanted to, I hope most of this video isn't unbelievably hard to follow, but yeah, thanks for taking the time to watch some of this if you have, and I hope that you might consider putting Jesus first in your life. I think you're going to find a huge difference. Certainly, the biggest difference for me has happened right on the inside. So on the inside of me, it's taken a while for it to work its way out, but I've definitely got. I feel that I've got my life is built on a rock. Yeah, where did I go? Where's my rock? Here's my rock. I got this from Laidlaw College, where I'm studying counselling at the moment. So they gave us a rock so that we could remember that we're standing on a rock when we're standing, when we're in faith, when we're putting our trust in Jesus, that we're standing on a rock. And I have found God, Jesus, the Holy Spirit, to be a rock that I can stand on in any circumstance. I found him to be a loving father. I found him to be a good provider. Jehovah Jireh, my provider. I found that trusting in God, my heart has become softer. I've become more forgiving. I've become more compassionate. I've become a lot happier. And that's why I've called this party, Jesus First, because I really just want to put forward a concept for the country and perhaps even for the world, that if we put Jesus first in government, and focus on kingdom concepts rather than economic welfare necessarily. I think economic welfare will follow kingdom concepts. It certainly did when David was king of Israel, and when Solomon was king. Job was supposed to be a great. Job from the Bible was supposed to have a lot of wealth. Abraham was supposed to have a lot of wealth. So I don't think that client. So that's my argument, and I look forward to. I look forward to hopefully some positive feedback. Thank you.